In this video, we're going to go over how simple it is to approach making a mannequin. It's not going to be using lots of different tools and lots of different references. We're going to be using a simple amount with one brush, which is just the move brush, any sort of gizmo move functionality, and using features within ZBrush like the reference feature and the duplication of heads just to track silhouettes and things like that. A mannequin like this is once you've finished and you're happy with your proportions, maybe putting objects and clothes on top of it, you'd then come in and start to dynamesh it all together and then start thinking about more refined parts of the sculpt, like creating bones, landmarks and skin details with muscles. So if you're interested in making this a sort of like an entry level, this would be the video. So my suggestion for people that are just starting off is to focus on like the broader elements of the character, so things like proportions, shapes and sizes. Today basically what we're going to be focusing on is keeping references down to a minimum, so eventually creating something like this and using reference guides within ZBrush to basically assist the sculpting and proportions process. So less about individual muscles and more about masses. Before getting into the main brute of the proportions layout, I definitely suggest just researching around the topic, just so you've got some ammunition and a better key understanding of how proportions are working out, you know, what muscles are leading to certain places, but not necessarily the massive complications that they have, like their incisions. So any sort of references with muscles and bones can be good, but primarily what you're trying to look at is things like silhouettes and how much space it's taking up. I suggest using PureF. So this is the software I've got down here. You can just basically copy paste some pictures in there, zoom in and out, and rearrange them quite easily in comparison to things like Photoshop. So getting started, coming to ZBrush, things might look a little bit different. I've just changed my UI, so we had a previous video on that, and also I got rid of the gradient, which sometimes I can feel is a bit annoying. So if you want to get rid of the gradient, it's into documents. You can then change the range. So if you zero this out, it's just gonna gray. That's going to be useful a little bit later when we're doing silhouettes, so we don't have like confused gradients all about the place. So starting off, probably going to start with the head. If we come into tools, it's the classic setup for ZBrush where we click the object or right click it. I'm going to select Sphere 3D. I'm then going to instantly make it a Polymesh 3D, and then that's going to create a new tool, and I'm just going to drag it out into the center. For this, I'm going to be using a basic matte cap. So if you click on materials, it's probably on the left hand side for you guys. You can choose it. I like to use the basic material. So drawing it out, in this case I've drawn it out again, and if I press Ctrl N, it's going to clear everything. So do make sure that when you draw it out, you're pressing T instantly. So it's this edit toggle thing up here. So with the head, it's going to be really useful if I can get one of these references in and load them into ZBrush, and then I can start to move and adapt the proportions based on those references. So where you can do that is if you go up into the textures toolbar up here, and then if we come into import, we can select basically something that we've previously saved. So I'm going to find that file under my downloads. So this is going to be the head guides that we start off with. Just close it there. So reopening texture, what we're going to do is select the head guides and then do add to spotlight. And that's basically going to bring it into this useful tool, which is called Spotlight. It's a way of moving around references in ZBrush and drawing through them and stuff like that. So when you see this wheel, you can manipulate the images, and then around the sides there's menu settings for different things. So I'm just going to hover over this little square. It's like a scaling button. And I'm going to scale it to a comfortable size on my screen where I can just see both of them at the same time. If you wanted, you could change the opacity if it's a bit too distracting. But what we're focusing on is basically the outline, so we're not too interested in all these kind of like individual lines. So once that's in, you can press Z. Pressing Z is going to switch between your reference manipulation, and if you press Z again, you're going to be able to paint and draw back onto the actual mesh itself. If at any point you want to hide this image, you can press Shift and Z. So that can sometimes be useful if we just want to work on the mesh itself and not have all those distractions. But today we're primarily going to be using this to sculpt with and use it as a guide. So what you might find is as soon as you start to try and sculpt through the reference images, you get this slight issue where the image is getting projected back onto the sculpt. So that can sometimes be useful for certain things, but not for what we want today. So there's a setting that we can turn that off. If you come into the brushes section and then go down to, I believe, samples. So under samples, there's this toggleable called spotlight projection. If we turn that off, it means that now that we paint, it's not going to project that reference image back on top of it. So now what we're going to use this for is basically a base to start the overall shape of our head, because the head's going to be one of the most important things that build the rest of the body. So all the body proportions are based off the head. So if you've got latest versions of ZBrush, you'll see that there's an orientation indicator, which is really useful. So this just means that it's the front of the face that we'll be making. If you don't have that, I'd suggest putting a little dot just to show where the front of the face is. Also, you can just pretty much guess it. If you press X, that's going to turn on our symmetry. So without X, we've obviously not got symmetry. With X, we do. So you can see that this is going to be the front of the face. And then as we turn it side and hold Shift, it's going to lock it to the side. So starting off with the head, I like to go with the cranium. So what's going to happen is we basically use the camera to position it in this sort of area. So then we can use move to edit the silhouettes and bring them back to the references. So I'm just going to go to the move tool. So that could be BMV for the people who haven't got hotkeys. I highly suggest the hotkeys because there's past videos for that. So basically all I'm going to do is click on the furthest most edge of the sphere and just bring it all the way as far as I can to the edges of the reference. So at this point, it's probably worth turning this into a Dynamesh, just in case we're making big edits that the geometry can't keep up with. So if I come into geometry and then under Dynamesh, I'm going to use Dynamesh, and I'm going to use it at a low resolution. We're not so interested in the details themselves, but more over the large forms. So maybe a resolution of 40, so that's okay. I can also click and drag this to the side while holding Shift and check the front proportions. I'm just going to bring it to this area and check that we're sort of in the right zone. So it's looking okay. Bring it to the side. At this point, you can lock cameras, and we'll do that a bit later with the body. But for the head, we're just going to go for a quick base. The next stage is making this jaw area. A neat trick for that is we're going to use masking and a form of tool manipulation. So if you hold Control, that's going to bring up the masking options or the masking brush up here. If you click on that once, we're going to change that to a masking rectangle, and that's going to give us the ability to just hold Control, click, and then drag out a small square. So I like to aim for sort of the top of the brow and where the ear could be, or the back of the jaw. I'm going to let go. Now what I'm going to do is with that selection, press Control and click off to the side, and that's going to invert the masks. And then with move's going to be like the primary tool that we use throughout the thing. I'm going to get quite a big brush size, and then I'm going to grab this particular area and just start dragging it down. I don't want to be too tedious with it because everything's up for change a bit later. I just want the primary masses. So as long as it's following this general rule, everything's going to be fine when it comes to refining it a little bit later. So that's looking good. I'm just going to turn it to the side and then hold Shift to snap it. And then I'm going to use this as a guide to sort of shape the front. So when we're shaping the front and the side, we'll probably lose track of the diagonals. So when you look at it from a diagonal aspect, it might not look fully formed as a human, but that's all right. We're only really after the length and width of the head, really. A cool trick that you can do is if you've got a bit too much mass sort of like overbearing here, you can use the move tool, or you can use Control Shift, and that's going to bring up the selection rectangle. You can change that to something called a clip curve, and basically what a clip curve is going to do is when we select that, now our Control Shift tool has turned into this clip curve thing. Just like the rectangle, I'm going to click and hold that, and it's going to draw a line. I'm basically going to draw it to the side of the head to cut off the sides. And as you can see, it's made this nice flat surface, which naturally occurs with the head and the cranium, but we get onto that later. So at that point, we can see that the head's looking okay, and from the side, it's looking fairly okay. If I want to make it more realistic, I might, or for my own reference, is just get a normal brush, or maybe a Damien standard, and then just draw a little line so I can see where the midpoint for the head could be. I'm just going to re-dynamesh it by drawing a mask out into the blank area, and it's going to recalculate everything. So it's going to be really low resolution, but that's okay. It's just a reference. So that's roughly where our eyes are going to be. We can check it against here. It's sort of in the same location. Maybe want to tighten the jaw up just so we know the proportions. At this point, I'd suggest pressing Shift and Z, and then that's going to get rid of the references. Now what we'll do is just use quite a large smooth, and because it's a low resolution, it's going to kind of like blur out all the details that we don't want. But the primary thing is that we do have that mass and scale of the head. You can take this as far as you want. You can maybe put in some planes of the faces, maybe from, naturally when you're going front and side from perspectives, you get natural square looks. So you can just decide to take those down. I'd suggest using a brush called Trim Dynamic. So Trim Dynamic's basically going to get rid of any corners. So from the top and from the side, we can just like round out the head. So that's a bit of a black hole going into that. You'll end up just finishing the face, but primarily what we want is just that mannequin style. So with that kind of be like the size of the head and the mannequin, I'm just going to flatten the front of the face so it's not as distracting or won't annoy me as much. The next thing we're going to do is start to build the rest of the body. So now that we've got the head proportions, I like to lock those in and not change them too much as we go along. So a way of doing this is, what we can do is if we come to the subtools palette and bring that down, there's going to be a button called duplicate. So once we duplicate this, we have two heads now. I'm going to come up to the move gizmo, and then I'm going to move this to the side. So once that's moved to the side, what I'm going to be doing is duplicating this down 8 times, and that's going to be used as a reference for the rest of our body landmarks. So usually ideal proportions, you're looking at sort of 8 heads, like you can see it here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all going up to the head, and these are basically head units, and then we can use them. So a nice thing to do is set that out in ZBrush ready for us to use. So with that selected, the second one, the first one's the one we're going to work on. We're going to do an interesting technique. So what we're going to do is hold Alt while we have the second one selected, and then we're going to move it to a place potentially just at the top of the head, roughly there. Now, while we're holding Control and moving the gizmo, we actually get to duplicate it. Now, a cool feature is if we let go of Control and keep the mouse button held and then drag down, it's going to continue to duplicate in the direct translation of that. So right now we've got 3 heads, so 4, 5, 6, 7. We've gone off screen, and then we can just do the final one, another Control, bring it there, double check that we've got 8 heads, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Cool. Going to use that as the basis for making the rest of the body. So all of these heads, because we were copying via Control, they're all one object. So right now they're under one subtool. I'm just going to hold Control and clear the mask, because what it does, it masks all the rest of the heads. Because we're going to be looking at it from the front and the side, I want to just move this backwards so it's not going to interfere with any sort of sculpting that we're doing. So we can see the proportions from the front, and we can also see it from the side. Next thing I want to do is basically add the major landmarks, or the major masses, what all the limbs come from, so things like the pelvis and the rib cage. So the way I like to go about this is coming to a button called Append, which is under Subtools. So once you click Append, I always like to start with a sphere. So it's going to bring a sphere into the Subtools, and then I'm just going to bring it down roughly around where I think a rib cage would be. It's probably worth at this point changing it into a Dynamesh. So again, at a lowish resolution, and then clicking Dynamesh. I also want to make sure that my symmetry is on. So you can see there's just one dot here. I'm going to press X, and then that's going to bring back our symmetry. So we've got the basis of our rib cage. The next thing I want to do is bring in a different reference, so I can start to do a similar thing that we did with the head and just like match up the silhouettes. So coming to texture again, we're going to go into import and then find our male proportions, or any sort of proportions that you prefer. You know, sometimes you can get heroic proportions, which are a bit bigger. Going to select the image that we got and add it to the spotlight. So this brings up our old friend. I'm going to push it to about here, to the size of the screen that I'm comfortable with, because we're going to be working at this size. I'd suggest bringing it up to somewhere you're comfortable, maybe there, so it takes the whole place. Here we definitely want to change the opacity. So at about 2 o'clock on this wheel, there's something called opacity. If you click and hold that, it's going to scale it down. I'm interested in the edge of the lines and the object itself, so somewhere around there is pretty good. Once I'm happy with that, I can press Z once, and then now I'm back into kind of like creation and sculpting mode. A key thing to note is while you're doing this, it's important to have perspective turned off. So perspective is going to manipulate and warp. If you've ever taken a camera or a selfie photo, it's usually like warped and large up in front of your face. We want to turn that off because we're using orthographic or just like basic views. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up some cameras to reference. So whenever we click a certain key, it's going to lock back into here. If you remember with the head, we were sort of trying to manipulate it and put it back into its place. Luckily, there's a bit of a shortcut we can do and combine a couple of features to basically do that for us. So the first thing I want to do is basically align this here. Sorry. So a nice feature with this is that because we've already got our 8 heads worth of heads, so what we can do is align it to the bottom line here, which is the bottom of the toes, and also the line up here, so we know for sure that everything's kind of working out perfectly. You know, maybe slight edits here and there, but anatomy's not that accurate, to be honest, with different types of body types. So I'm going to move the camera just about here, so these heads line up to this side, and then I'm going to take it to the side so we can start working on it. Cool. Now I'm going to consider that a place that we work from. So the next stage, what we're going to do is lock in that camera movement. So if we go into Documents and Z App Link Properties, in fact I'm just going to click here to dock it to the side so it's a bit easier to use. Once the Z App Link properties are open, you'll see that there's like front, right, left, etc. So now that we've got this all aligned and it's perfect, I'm going to click front. Basically what that does is it locks in this camera position, and then whenever I click front again, it's going to re-reference back to this camera. So say if I do some work and manipulation and then I want to find where I was previously, I can just press front and it's going to snap back. So in combination with Spotlight makes like a really cool workflow for building up anatomies and proportions. So the next one I'm going to do is I'm just going to click front to make sure it's identically on there without touching any keys, and it's important to do this. I'm going to drag sideways and hold shift. So now it's in the same proportions, but it's on the side. Now while I'm holding Alt, I'm going to press shift. Whoops. Just make sure that's aligned perfectly. Let's redo that. Whoa. So I'm going to turn it sideways, and now I'm going to bring it identically and make sure it lines up perfectly back to the same person. And my Windows seems to be kicking off. Right, so now that's done, I'm going to lock that camera position onto left, because we're looking at it from the left side. So now what you'll see is every time we click front and every time we click left, it's going to snap to these references, and then we can start to manipulate things over that. So that's really cool, but we don't want to be clicking these all the time. So to take that even further, what we can do is assign a hotkey. So if you want to assign a hotkey and you press Control and Alt, and then we're going to click front, I'm just going to press 3. And I already have a hotkey on 3, but I'm just going to press OK to overwrite it. So you can see the custom hotkeys being assigned successfully. The next one I'm going to do is I'm going to do left, and this time put it to 4. So again, just pressing Control and Alt, and I'm going to click once on left, and now I'm going to press 4 on the hotkey. Again, I've got it assigned, but I'm going to overwrite it. So now when I press 3 and 4, it's going to switch between the two views. So I can mess up and then always come back to these when I'm done. So moving on to the rib cage, the next thing I want to do is basically size this up to a reasonable state. It doesn't have to be perfect. As we're going on, you don't have to be pixel perfect where everything, as long as there's a rough estimate of where things are, that's perfectly fine enough. So with that sphere, I'm going to use the move tool. So it's pretty much the only tool we're going to be using today. I'm going to get a large brush and basically try and identify the roundabout position of where the rib cage will be as a mass. So it doesn't have to be perfect. We can press 4 to take it to the side, and then just position it roughly inside the silhouette of this drawing. I don't want to do the trunk just yet. The trunk's going to be a different object. We're going to be slowly adding limbs and slowly adding different parts of mass, and it's going to finally form the mannequin. So roughly like that. I can always come back and change it later. And from the front, the reference itself isn't aligned perfectly, but as I said, we're not too fussed. With rib cages, they usually taper towards the top a bit, and one feature you can do is if you pick the trim brush, you can just cut off a bit of the base like this, do a couple of strokes, and that's going to make a natural transition from when the rib cage ends. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can come back here and basically move them at your will later. So finally, just going to check from the front and the back. Seems reasonable enough. And now we can move on to the pelvis area. With the pelvis, it's the same workflow and methodology. You come to, I'll just close these preferences documents. We can append a new object. The only difference is that when we append it, we're going to have to redynamesh it, and then we're going to have to press X to bring back the symmetry. What I like to do is just duplicate with the thing that I did before. So a rib cage, we're going to just turn that into a pelvis pretty much. So I'm going to duplicate that. You can see it's coming as a different subtool, and then I'm going to come to move and then just move it down. I'm not too fussed that it's sort of like breaking up that much. Let's move this down. Now with the move tool, I'm just going to get a very large brush and then start adjusting the sides and creating somewhat of a hip shape. It can really be just a triangle, to be honest. From the side it might look a bit funny. So just getting the general mass. You're more than welcome to sort of fill out the glutes as well. This isn't just about bones, it's about masses, so how much space this object's going to be taking up. Pretty representable as a pelvis, I'd say. So let's just check from the front. It's looking good. Probably bring it up ever so slightly, just so it's in line with our references here. Bring it out. Pressing 4 from the side, it's looking pretty okay. Right, the next thing I'd like to do is start attaching limbs. So the best way to do a limb is, if we come to append, we're just going to bring in a normal sphere. And with that sphere selected, we can bring it off to the side. Now, I'm going to press 3 to bring it to the front, and I'm going to place it roughly in the position where the bone's going to meet the pelvis. So that's the top of the leg, so looking at it from the side, just about there. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. What I'm going to do to stretch this out is I'm going to do something similar to how we made the jaw. I'm going to hold Control and then draw a rectangle to collect half the sphere, and then I'm going to invert that, and that's given me the ability to edit the bottom half. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the move function just to bring down like a massive part of a leg. I'm going to bring it all the way down to the knee joint and match it up to the references. I can press 4 again, see the side, bring it back to roughly where the knee is. I'm going to unmask it, and now that we've got that shape, I'm going to Dynamesh it. So that means we can draw on it without it having too many problems. Again, at like a low resolution with the Dynamesh. So with Dynamesh activated, you can keep it like that. I'd probably suggest coming in and just giving it a little bit of shape. As you see, you don't have to have super anatomy knowledge. You can just follow what you can see with the reference. So with the move tool selected, we can just bring certain parts out or bring them back in. Same with the side. You know, quads are quite large. You're going to have a lot of mass here. So focusing on the silhouette and also bringing it back a bit for a hamstring. Eventually what we're going to do is we're going to combine these all together. So any rough transitions we can smooth out later with a bit of clay. So looking good from the front, looking good from the side. I'm going to do something similar that we did with the head and the pelvis and the rib cage. Is I'm just going to duplicate the top of the leg. It's turned into another subtool, and then bring it all the way down to roughly where the knee is. Pressing 4, I'm going to resize it just so it hits the ankle here. Now coming to the move tool, focusing on the sides of the silhouette, I'm going to use loads of small brush strokes just to nudge it back into position. And you can see we're starting to get more of a sort of like a lower leg shape from the side especially. Pressing 3, I'm just going to manipulate it from the front. So the knee joint obviously goes in ever so slightly because there's no muscles. It's very tendinous and bony. Same with the ankle. You know, the ankle's quite bony, so it's coming in. I'm not sweating it. I'm not making it sort of perfect. I'm just concentrating on the major forms, and we can put the other things in later. You're more than welcome to just do a massive smooth to get rid of any awkward looking things. So bringing that there. So it looks good from the front and the side. I'm going to do this anyway, which is get into the habit of saving. So I'm just going to press 9. It's going to give it an auto save. And now we can move on to the arm. So for the arm, I'm going to append a sphere. So we've got our sphere. As you see, it's pretty repetitive stuff, and it's quite similar in the sense, you know, it follows the process of bringing a sphere in, positioning it where the bone and the joint potentially could be, or from your studies and your research where it should be. And then for limbs, what we can do is we can half mask it, invert it, and then bring it down to the desired sort of length. So you can either do the full arm, or you can just do the upper arm. So, you know, the bicep and triceps. I'll probably just start here. I'm not too fussed at the positioning, so front seems good. eventually what we're going to do is turn them back into, once we've got the proportions, like turn it back into an A pose. So looking at the side, I'm going to bring his arm joint back, his elbow right here. And then I'm also going to give a little bit of a bicep indication. That's just going to help with the look of the joint. So if the joint's nice and small, and then you've got the rest of the arm that kind of like opens up, it looks better. Again, dynameshing it just so you've got that resolution. You're more than welcome to put a bulk in here, which is the back of the arm, which is the tricep, which is falling a bit higher up the arm. The shoulder's going to come in as its separate object, so this section doesn't necessarily have to be accurate or big. We can just turn it into like a basic arm shape. That's going to be useful because once we duplicate this, we're going to duplicate the top arm and then bring it down via move and turn this into the forearm. So with the gizmo, I can hold Alt, and then I'm just going to draw it down and lead it to this edge, and it's basically going to draw the gizmo and align it to that object. I can then like reposition it, put it back in its joint, look at it from the side and give it like different angles. So I'm aiming for the wrist. Once the position's done, the joint's good. It's about making the ends thinner. So with the wrist, it gets pretty thin. So I'm just going to, still with the move brush, just attacking each side and bringing it in back and forth, back and forth. Looking at it from the front again, just making it much, much smaller. With the arm, I could put a little bit of a pit in there. So if you ever make an observation, you know, with your own arm or any sort of references, you can just follow those. So I'm just going to put a little divot in there, and then that can naturally lead to a bit of a bicep when it comes. So you can see how it starts to form, and then later you can refine it. So we've done that. Next thing I'd probably do is the belly or the trunk. It's sort of like all the abdomen and the muscles surrounding that. What I could do is get the rib cage and just duplicate it into a second subtool, and then move it downwards. So it's I can move it slightly like this, or rescale it so it's much smaller. Right here. So these are going to be the abs. I mean, it looks kind of okay already. It's probably going to need some assistance from the side. So we can press 4 and just check see how it looks. So currently the arm's in the way. What you can do is you can alt click the object, and then when you come into the side panel, you can click these little eyes, and then they're gonna vanish. And then when we click back on the trunk, it re-shows it. So the trunk's sort of like curved. He's got a bit of an anterior tilt here. The abs are going to go all the way back through the pelvis and start at the top of the rib cage. So from the side, that looks fairly decent. And now let's check it from the front. So the front, obviously the drawing itself is a bit wonky, but we can basically see what it is. I'm going to taper it down and bring it in like that, and then the hips come out ever so slightly. At this point, it's probably worth, because we've been sticking to the references so religiously, it's worth coming out and just getting a sense of looking around the human and seeing how it works out. Just like here, we were making front and side manipulations, and we've lost track of like the corners. So if you want to bring the corners back in, just get your trim brush and then start to feather it in and make it more cylindrical, because organics, you know, it's not about corners, it's about curves, it's about cylinders and spheres. So anywhere you see sort of like a squarish shape, you want to be fleshing that out and basically smoothing it. So let's just double check this on track. Going to bring back the arms just so we can see them. Next, we can do things like add the neck. So if I click append, I can bring in a cylinder, and now I'm just going to position the cylinder with moving, looking at the side and bringing it down. So again, it's just the repetitive motion of going through and adjusting parts of the body so they fit. What I'll probably do is, because it's a lot of the same, I'm going to finish it off, speed up the video, and then you can see how the rest is made. And eventually we'll get on to actually moving the limbs so they're in an A pose, so it's much easier to sculpt. Okay, so as I went through this, basically all that was added was similar spheres in the shape of kind of like a deltoid muscle, just connecting the top to the bottom. Duplication of the rib cage, creating the higher part of the trunk, so where all the kind of the neck and the joints feel together. So it was quite easy just to fill those in. You can always refine it later. And also all the hands. So just again, it was a duplication and adjusting it from the front and the side until it roughly resembles the size of the hand. So like basically Leo will come in and do that, and the same with the foot. So the next stage is just moving the limbs before we duplicate it to the other side, or make a mirror version. So the first thing I want to do with the arm is, if I alt click the arm, you can see that when I come to the move, I have the functions to kind of like adjust it all about the place. Ideally, I want to move all of this arm at once. So if I come and hold Alt, I can take this gizmo pointer and put it on the joint, so where the arm's going to rotate from, and then just make sure it's sort of in the right place. And obviously when I move it, it's only moving the upper arm. So if you look on top of the gizmo, there's this little icon here. If we click that once, it's going to turn into 3 little tick boxes, and this is basically a multi-selection. So when I'm holding Control and Shift, I can click on an object. So the first one I'm going to click on while holding Control and Shift is the upper arm. Then I'm going to select the lower arm, and then I'm going to select the hand. So now when it comes to moving, I can move them all at once, and because it is a joint, I can even do rotations, so you know how the arm would normally rotate. And I just want to put it in a natural position now that we've got all the proportions and the anatomy done. A natural position where I can start to sculpt under places like the armpits, and attack places like the inside of the ribs, so it's out of the way. Once you're done with that, it's important to Control and Shift click off to the side and draw a little circle, or just do a drag click, and that's going to clear everything, and then come back to the normal single mode. So now we've got everything moved, and then you're more than welcome to readjust the individual bits, because the way we've done it, it's comprised of separate multi-tools where we can adjust them all and reshape them and resize them as we please. And then I'm also going to do the exact same process with the leg. So getting the gizmo, putting the joint in the location by holding Alt and moving the manipulator, activating the multi-selection, and then holding Control and Shift and just clicking all the limbs individually. So once that's done, now I can rotate it outwards to more of a generic A pose. Control Shift, draw us off to the side just to clear it, and then bring it back to the individual selector. After that, we then want to start mirroring. So the mirroring option is in a weird place. It's up in Z plugins, and then on Z plugins you're going to find Subtool Master, and Subtool Master is the master of subtools. So first we're going to select the upper arm because we want to mirror that. I'm going to open the plugins and then click this button to dock it, just so I can click it loads of times. And then we're going to search for something called mirror. Now when we mirror and click that, we want the options to merge it as one subtool, and we also want it in the x-axis. So just going to press OK, and you can see that duplicates. So now what we're going to do is do that for every single one. So now that we've sort of made our first mannequin, you can add all individual pieces. Maybe you want to add some more spheres for the glutes, or maybe do individual pecs. Some people even like to break it down to the individual muscle, and they find that easy. But once you've got this, you can use this for all sorts of characters. Say you're making like a stylized guy which was really muscly, you just come in here and start to adapt certain proportions and use the move tool to make it fit how you want. So that's basically the shortest rundown I can do of starting off a character from nothing and getting something that we can start to work with.